So, welcome to the show. This is the interviews with Richard Windmann. It's a SCSA production, and we interview subject matter experts, psychologists, advocates, and even survivors and victims of childhood sex abuse. And this week's guest is Jimmi Toro. He comes to us from Utah. I believe he's a survivor, and he's an artist as well. Has some incredible art, and he's here today to tell us about his story. So thank you for joining us, Jimmy.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
So, tell us a little about you, where you're from, and what is as much as you're willing to share.
Sure.
What's your story?
Well, I grew up in California where all this abuse happened. I've moved around a few times, and currently I'm in Salt Lake City. Who knows where I'll be in the future? But yeah, all the abuse happened as a little kid in those early ages. Age 2 or 3 up to about age 8. As you know, not always, but often with little boys, anyways. They can age out of that
Mhm.
about that age, and some people have asked the question, well, why did the abuse stop at age 8? Right. Well, there's various reasons that can happen. Some of the clientele who participate in this awfulness, they like younger boys, and so they don't like them when they get older. Often young boys can. Well, when you're 8 or 9, you might be you might it might be harder to get away with their abuse. Kids can start to fight back a little bit. Kids get a little bit wiser to what's going on, and they can tell authorities and this and that. And that's another common reason that some of the boys will age out at that age, or be out of the child abuse stuff, if you will.
Mhm.
And so yeah, and then I have a classic story where what I went through was so awful for so many years that I literally suppressed it. And as you know, that can be the case, especially if the young kid is abused as a little child, and their parent or their caregiver is the abuser.
Mhm.
They don't have anybody to go to for safety. And when you're in that abusive situation as a little child, that's the one thing you want, is you want safety and protection. And if you don't find it, well, then you will suppress it. And if it's awful abuse, you will often suppress it all through your adulthood, which was the case with me. And so I'm 60 years old now. About age 45, um, these episodes started happening to me. I had no idea what they were. They were awful and they were very painful. And it's like this thing attacking my body. And for 14 years, I went through thousands of those, not knowing what it was. And then about a year ago, I had my first memory come back. And that was awful, awful, awful hell. And then for about a 9-month period, these memories just came and came and came, one after the other after the other. And so I learned a whole lot about the process of trauma. And it's an interesting idea that, as a child, you live through this and then it can be suppressed. And then as an adult, it can all come tumbling back. And, and in many cases, in many ways, I would say it can be awfuler than what happened as a child. Awfuler in the respect that you don't you don't know the duration of it. It can come at any moment. You don't know when it's going to end, which was the case with me. And so that's my story in a nutshell. And then we can pick that apart and go into the reasons why these perpetrators do what they do to little kids. What can we do to protect ourselves, make awareness? We can talk about the healing process, which is absolutely fascinating. Many adults never heal. They become addicted, and their life just goes to hell, and then one day they die, which is not uncommon. And so I'm not sure in this whole scope of things, because I know you've been through your hell too, and I'm not sure where you want to go or where you want to start, but I'm happy to go anywhere with you on it.
Well, let's start with let's summarize what we just talked about. So,
Sure.
childhood sex abuse, typically when it's a younger child, the memories tend to be repressed.
Yes.
Um, and But it happens to older children too. Like in my example, I was molested from 7 to 17.
Yeah.
And so, because mine was a little bit older, my memories weren't recessed. I'm sorry, repressed. I call them recessed memories.
Yeah. Same idea.
Yeah. So I always knew I was molested. Tried to commit suicide when I was 19. Life magically got better after that. I kept myself busy, busy, busy.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, because it's a secret, we have this misplaced shame and guilt. We can't tell anybody, so we do tend to medicate the pain with alcohol and drugs, other
Yeah.
risky behaviors, addictions.
Yeah.
And we all have depression, we all have PTSD, sometimes CPTSD, anxiety disorder, sometimes dissociative disorder. And it's like you explained, it's a real hell living through, and healing from it can be a real challenge. In fact, I'm convinced that there is no cure for what we have, but what we can do is try to successfully manage it. What's your thoughts on that?
That's interesting because I think the data would prove what you say to be, for the most part, correct. But I would suggest that um, some people do better at it than others. And in my case, I feel very fortunate that I never became addicted to alcohol, drugs, porn, etc. I have no idea why, because I grew up around all that. I'm very close to that stuff, so I'm lucky that way.
Mm.
When the memories started coming back, um, that was hell to live through. But with that hell, with that pain, etc., I would suggest that there's a magical element to that of healing, which we can get into, which worked for me. Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. But this process of healing, or the way I went through it, it's just amazing. It's really magical, and I don't know this. I believe that many or most people who've been through some even much lighter trauma can explore this same idea of healing. And it's the basic idea that you can go back in time to when those ugly events happened, and you can literally rewrite the narrative. You can literally change what happened. You can provide that safety to that little kid that the little kid did not have, the little you did not have. And we can explore that if you want.
Sure, it sounds a lot like a lot of trauma informed therapists now. They'll do EMDR, they'll do ego state therapy in addition to and as a primer or an adjunct to EMDR. And it's the same concept. You go back and revisit that and re-examine it. So tell us your version of it.
Sure. Um, it's not uncommon for people to want to go back to these memories and revisit them, if you will.
Mm.
Um, and and then you might ask yourself, well, why would a person want to go back and revisit it? To what end, if you will? And I've got plenty of friends who've been through some awful things, and they've spent untold thousands of dollars on psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists and counselors over the years. And in many of their journeys, they went back to those memories of what happened to them way back when, and they're still not healed. And I ask myself, okay, why? And so when I question them on a really deeper level, I uncover some things. So, for instance, we'll take one friend I have. I won't name his name, but he's a perfect example of this. And so I said, okay, when you went back there, it's like the adult you going back to the little you. When you went back there, did you notice there was a separation? Did you notice that the adult you were visiting the little you? You weren't like just one thing. You're separate things. And then, did you have that little you alter the narrative, change the situation? Not the adult you going back and changing the situation, but helping the little kid change the situation. And I would suggest that it's the little kid that needs to do the work. And so in many cases, I went back, well, in all the cases, I went back and I learned over time by doing these. And I did hundreds and hundreds of these. And in this book I have out just recently, I actually I took 22 of these stories, and they range. I picked 22 because of the range, right? So a certain kind of abuse can be awful. It can be physical. It can be violent. It can be bloody. It can be rape, etc. Other types of abuses can be a little more simple but equally traumatic, like being lost, or being discarded, or being lonely, or not being heard. You're in a family of 10 kids and your parents are the abusers, and the perpetrators pick on you and your sister, let's say, but not the rest of the kids. And so if you they're really smart, by the way, these abusers, they know what they're doing. And so if the little kid says I was abused, nobody believes them because they ask the other siblings and they say, no, this didn't happen to me. So you can have moments where you're not heard and you're in absolute pain and nobody's listening to you. Well, that alone is traumatic. And so if you imagine, okay, like you're the bus driver, the adult you, and you're driving this bus, and in the bus you have a whole bunch of little yous. And let's say you were literally abused 100 times. I'm just making this up. Well, that bus can be full of 100 little yous. And it's possible that you have to go back in time to every single one of those situations and clean it up, if you will. And so often I would go back when I'd find this little kid in this awful situation, and I would help, or I'd whisper in his ear and say, "What do you want? What do you want to do? What, you know?" And the kid would produce the magic. And so the magic can be literally anything. Anything. The little child can say, "Well, I want to just get out of here." Okay, well, let's go. Let's get out of there. Let's escape. Let's create a magical back door to this room that doesn't have a door. Or it can be a more powerful approach where the kid says, well, I want a bunch of angels with swords to show up and fight these people. Things like this. It's whatever the kid wants to imagine. Well, if you take that to the scientific realm, and you read like Einstein and other scientists at that who are at that level of thinking, many of them suggest that it's possible to literally go back in time and change things, or there's really no difference between past, present, and future if you go down that road, which is really intriguing. And in my situation, I would have this episode overcome me just completely out of the blue. This pain, it felt like it was going to kill me. My heart rate would jump, my mouth would go dry, my whole body would start shaking uncontrollably. It's like a major panic attack, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
And what people don't understand is when those memories come back, you mentioned PTSD and CPTSD. When those memories come back, whether they're triggered or they just happen, people don't understand it. It's not just the memory that's coming back. It's literally the feelings of being scared. It's all the emotion attached to it, which is more important than the memory. And the hormonal dump happens. And so you are, as an adult, you are literally that you're scared to death. And the hormones, because your body stores all this, and your hormones, the cortisol and the adrenaline that do damage to your body, they literally pump out as much as they did when that was happening to you as a little kid. And so you are literally reliving the horror of it all, every last little ounce of it. And it's in that moment where I figured out over time, and with the help of a really good psychiatrist, that I could go back in that scary, death grippy moment, and I could go. And sometimes it took a while to find this little kid. Sometimes I found this kid easily. Sometimes it's like I was floating, or like floating through space, looking for this absolutely horror emotion I was feeling. And so this idea of name it to tame it is like what you want to do is you want to name the emotion.
Mhm.
And then when I found the kid in that situation of being tortured, let's say, um, I was able to sneak in and whisper in that kid's ear sometimes, well, what do you want to do? What can we do so you can get out of here? And surprise, every one of these episodes surprised the hell out of me. I had no preconceived idea what was going to transpire. And sometimes that little kid fought back. Sometimes he escaped. We created this like room that was floating above the earth that we could go to, and he could be away from his abusers, if you will. Sometimes the adult me, he just jumped in my arms and I held him and we walked for miles and miles and miles till we got away from him. It's all kinds of interesting things. And so it's this idea of it's super painful, but it's super magical. And every episode I went through where that little kid was allowed to be safe, immediately the pain dropped and I released that stored episode out of my body every time. It works. Now,
But what's the technique? Yeah, are you doing this during meditation or some other type of modality, or are you just thinking about it?
well, at the beginning, I had a psychologist would be the right word. Um, help me go back in time and find this little kid. And it's interesting, right? Because if somebody challenged this idea and I would say to them, like if I said to you, Richard, tell me a memory in your life, not related to the abuse, just a memory that happened, maybe the day you were married or maybe a day you broke your arm or something that you actually remember, because we don't remember everything in our past. And I say, okay, well, when was that memory? And you say, well, that was like 30 years ago. I broke my arm, I was riding my bike, and I remember it because it hurt really bad, all this kind of stuff. And then I could challenge you and I could say, oh, well, what was the feeling around that memory when you broke your arm?
Mm.
Well, it really hurt and I was scared and I had to go to the hospital and whatever the emotion you could say. And say, okay, well, that was 30 years ago. Then I could challenge you and I could say, well, how 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 do I know you're not making this up? And you might get defensive and say, well, of course I'm not making it up. It actually happened to me and it's real. And if I even think about it today, I can conjure up the emotions and I can remember that the hurt and all this. These memories that I went back to are as real, if not real, more real than any memory I have in my life. They
Mm.
are that real. And 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 I remember the smells, I
Mhm.
remember the feelings, I remember everything. In fact, the emotion and the feeling of those memories is much stronger than the actual details of what happened.
Yeah,
In
today
fact,
I can actually smell their breath.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And it's not uncommon that when we go back to those memories that we don't remember every detail from A to Z. We remember fragments. That's not uncommon. But what's more strong is the other senses, and especially the being scared part of it. And so, yeah, it's as real as anything I can imagine. Now, I don't know if this works for everybody on all cases, but it would be interesting. This is an interesting discussion, especially with somebody like you who's been there. And so I don't want to on your show challenge you, but it would be interesting to kind of ask you if you don't mind.
Sure. Right.
Did you ever go back to your situations as a kid and let's say do what I'm describing?
I never talked to the kid. I observed. So number one, I've never done it on my own.
Right.
I did it through ego state therapy and EMDR, so guided by the counselor.
Yeah.
Ego state therapy is kind of interesting because you create the safe place. And for me, it was my grandmother's kitchen, and
Okay.
different versions of me all
Yeah.
come sit at the kitchen table. And
Yes.
so
Exactly.
that there's the businessman Richard, there's the adult Richard, there's the teenage
Uh,
Richard, the kid Richard, the
really.
just different versions of yourself. That's why I guess they call it ego state therapy. And little molested, well, raped Richard, we'll call it what it is.
Yeah.
He was always scared to come into the kitchen, and until we were able to get him to come down and sit at the table with the other Richards and talk. That's when we started the EMDR therapy. Um, I think I'm a little bit different in that uh what helps me, well, first off, at 47 years old, I never forgot about it. I always knew I was molested, but it came back and it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was the Jerry Sandusky case. You know,
Okay.
we see on TV all the time a teacher raping a kid, a janitor raping a kid, a coach.
Yeah.
But man, and we all turn the channel or whatever we need to do to deal with it. But Jerry Sandusky, I think the media did too good of a job describing the details of the abuse. And it
Was
just,
he that coach on the East Coast?
yeah, at Penn State.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, but the reporters would talk about where his man cave was in his house and the
Yeah,
shower scenes and stuff like that. And that really got to me.
yeah,
And I hit the, but drugs never stuck with me, but alcohol wasn't my problem. It was my solution, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
And I hit the bottle really, really, really hard for 10 years.
Oh wow.
Um, I went to the church while where one of my abuses happened. They settled with me. Uh, Still didn't have any satisfaction. All of the Boy Scouts, Scoutmasters, got lengthy sentences. I testified against them, and they all died in jail. So I got criminal justice and I got civil justice, but somehow I wasn't satisfied.
Yeah,
And so what wound up working for me, and it was painful at first because all this vicarious trauma going on. You tell your story, and it's
yeah,
painful at first, and you tell it again, and it gets a little easier and easier, and you become an advocate.
yeah,
And then you start to meet people and learn their stories too. And I think that just that exposure and the repetition made me more comfortable with the subject. And I finally quit drinking. That was really good. I was on Lexapro, SSRI for 3 decades, higher doses, higher doses, higher doses.
wow.
I weaned off of that. Didn't tell my doctor, but I weaned off of it safely. My wife's a nurse, so I know how to do that.
Good for you.
And when I was off the medications, I wasn't depressed anymore, and so I quit drinking in a decision just like that. I'd struggled with stop drinking, and once I was off the medication, I was just able to make a simple decision and not do it anymore. And then changes. Yeah, self care is a big deal for survivors, and so self care is something that I never did, and so I changed my diet. uh, Currently trying to beat this monster right here.
Right.
Um, so that's what worked for me. Uh, it's there wasn't no plan. It just kind of played out. I wish I could say I was a genius. I can tell you what's really helpful for like the general population, and I learned this from our groups, is our peer-led support meetings are very, very, very effective. Everybody really raves about that. Us guys at SCSA, the women and men don't mingle in terms of the support groups. Because I would
Yeah,
feel uncomfortable telling my story in detail to Rachel, for example. I'm sure she would be uncomfortable telling me about her abuse.
yeah,
And so we have co-ed support groups, and so once a week, us and the guys get together and talk about our abuse. Sometimes we talk about football. It just really, really depends. But we have this fellowship going on, and that's helped me. And the other guys rave about it. So that was effective for us. And yeah, so that's how we go on. We fight the good fight. We lobby. Like in Texas right now, the legislature is um, one of the reps is trying to pass a elimination of the statute of limitations with the look back retroactivity window. And
yeah,
then there's a guy, another representative that he's backed by the Catholics and the insurance lobby and all of that stuff. And he's got his competing bill that protects the predators in the institution. So we do stuff like that. It makes us feel productive, like we're doing something about it. What else worked for me, and I think we have this in common, is we're both multi-instrumentalists and composers.
Yeah.
art, I think, and I'm certainly I can see it in your life. It's very effective therapy for you. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Uh, I don't think it's uncommon for many artists to, let's say, be comfortable in their own space,
Hmm.
drawing in. And I don't know if there's 100% correlation there, but when you're abused and you have no safety, that's what you do. Where do you go but bring it in, right?
Hmm.
It's just what you do. That's the only form of protection you have at the moment. And so,
We can see your art behind you. Let me show everybody this though. This is amazing. When I saw this piece that you did, it's
oh yeah,
called Calm.
yeah.
Uh, Tell us a little bit about this. I'm just absolutely mesmerized by this. It's my computer background screen now, as you can see.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I have this book coming out. It has a whole bunch of art in it. This is one of the pieces in there, and what this symbolizes is this idea of. I mean, the conclusion of the book is the book is called Heal, and so the conclusion of the book is really about healing. But you got to go through the pain and all the yucky stuff, and you got to set it up, and then you explain, well, how do you heal from what, right? So you have to explain what you're healing from, and so this is symbolic of this idea that there's a process in the healing where you do reach a point of calmness. All and so the female figure on the back of the bull is representative of that calmness in the midst of the chaos and the bull being charging. And it's that that's the magical part of the healing for me, is when I was able to go back to that little child and find that little child in the absolute worst condition in the process of major trauma. And I was able to go in and create that safety, or another way of saying it would be to help empower that child, so that that child could create his own safety. And when that moment happened is when it became really magical. And this is representative of that moment. You're exhausted, but you're calm when all this chaos going around you and all this abuse.
Exactly what I was going to say. Calm in the middle of all the chaos. What's the other figure depict? Not the crow, the other human.
All right. That that's just an artistic depiction of um, the abuser, if you will, kind of shrinking or being reduced to a non-threatening figure.
Okay.
Because if abusers are coming and grabbing a little child and they're going to take him to a room and do really awful things to him, well, one of the reasons I constantly call these abusers cowards is because
Hmm.
they prey on they prey on little children. And it doesn't take a lot of courage to abuse and to dominate mentally and physically a little child, and so they are cowards. And to and so that this figure at the top represents the adult abuser who is now cowering instead of being dominant.
And what about the raven or the crow to the left?
Yeah, no, that's good you say that, because ravens and crows are kind of in the same family, if you will. But
Mhm.
hi- hi- historically or traditionally, a crow often represents death and transforming. And, different societies and communities have their own symbolism of many things throughout history. And I like the representation of the crow as this definitely as a symbol of death, because in my case, I saw and experienced a lot of death. Often these abusers will kill. My story is ritualistic sexual abuse, religious bent or based, and often in their religious things that they did. They wore robes and garments, and they had all these rituals and whatnot. And, well, a big part of it was killing kids.
Wow. What religion, if you don't mind me asking?
It's not that they were a religion. Like
A
it's more
cult.
like Yeah, if you like take, let's say, a classic study that most people know would be a Bible, and you take Bible history and you take the Jews, and they built their temples back in the days of Moses, and they wore their temple robes, and they did all these sacrifices. It was very ritualistic and symbolic of what they did. And the claim is with those folks is that they were worshiping a god and it was all good, let's say. Well, classic Jewish history shows that through time after Moses, they would be, let's say, righteous or good people, but they would also turn to be a wicked people. And like in the King Ahab and Jezebel, the classic scenario in Jewish history where they were extremely wicked. And so they would take those religious uh, ceremonies and they would completely turn them on their head, and they would sacrifice babies, and they would throw babies at walls. They have this big bronze god with its hands out, and then they would heat the bronze figure up inside with fire, and they would place babies on it, and it would just,
Hmm.
anyways, throughout so many historically so many situations, they devolved to this point where they're worshiping their gods, whoever the hell that is. And for some reason they like the idea of sacrificing children. It's like if you see a theme throughout history.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, and they do the same thing today. They just have to hide it more. And so I was involved in a situation where several groups of leaders of families would get together and do this same kind of thing in their own way. So I saw a lot of death. I saw a lot of blood. I'm surprised I made it out of it, to be honest. I had
Hmm.
little kids who were my age who I've seen them sacrificed. I've seen them die.
Yeah.
So this crow to me represents all the death, but a crow is also symbolic of transformation.
Wow.
So that's
I get asked this question all the time. I want to see your answer. Where was your
sure.
parents in all of this?
That is a great question. One of the interesting things about that is if you are a little kid, 2, 3, 4, doesn't matter,
Hmm.
and something awful happens to you, it can be a major trauma. You can be raped, like awful, or it can be a more minor trauma.
Hmm.
If on the heels of that trauma you have a loving parent to go to or guardian or somebody to find that safety, that trauma can literally be taken care of and released at that moment. It doesn't have to be stored. But if you're going through that hell and your parents or your caregivers are the perpetrators, you have nowhere to go for safety. That's when you store it in. That's when you lock it in. And so my dad was part of that. He was part of it. He wasn't the ringleader because he was more of a coward than they were. But he was,
Yeah.
and he was part of several groups of they get together and they do these crazy things. And so yeah, I had no father to go to because he was one of the abusers. My mom, I don't remember her at any of my abusive events, but it's not uncommon too that the women are threatened
Sure.
and they go along.
Hmm.
Or they're never invited to the show, let's say, but but I don't have any. I have no memory of being close to my dad. In fact, it's interesting that when my dad passed away, he passed away before any of these memories came back to me in adulthood.
Hmm.
And I remember the day he died, and me and a couple of siblings went to the funeral home, and you have to participate in the preparations of the funeral, pre-funeral, and all that. And I remember walking to this room, and there's my dead father laying on a table, or whatever. And I remember looking at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. And it
Hmm.
shocked me that I felt nothing. I didn't know why. It's like my dad just died. I should be mourning or sad. I felt, and that bugged me for years. Why did I feel nothing? Well, when all the memories came back last year, all makes sense.
Just last year.
2022.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for 14 years, from about age 45 to age 40, age 45 50, to age 59, let's say, or whatever, I had thousands of these episodes with no memory attached. I had all the emotions, the feelings, the cortisol and adrenaline dump hitting my body. there's another interesting thing about that, and that is scientists have noticed that like when a lion chases a little deer, and that deer is running for its life, it is being traumatized, hardcore, and the lion will catch it, and sometimes the deer will just play dead, and sometimes the lion eats it, and that's the end of the story. But sometimes the lion will just sniff it and walk away. Maybe he's not hungry that day. And they notice that deer will just shake uncontrollably for several minutes, just whole body shake, shake, shake. And when it's done shaking off that trauma, it'll pop up and go about its day. And so it's a very realistic idea that that trauma somehow, if it's still in you, has needs to be released, needs to get out, like completely out, no longer there. I would suggest that that's possible, and it works for me. Hundreds of
Yeah.
and it doesn't work for most, I would suggest. And I don't know why. Why I could surmise, I can guess some reasons. One reason could be that it is so awful. Who would want to go there? You have to go there before you can release it. It is
Yeah.
so, so, so awful. Who would want to relive that?
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't. You know, we humans, we go out of our way to seek pleasure and avoid pain. It's just what we do. And that would be one reason. The other reason could be that this awful trauma unfortunately puts many people into addictive behaviors. And if you're smashed out on alcohol or drugs or something, you're not of the right mind to go deal with this anyways.
Mhm.
And so you got to come clean. You got to get that. You got to get beyond that. Then you got to go deal with it.
Mhm.
And so, and the other confusion I would say is there are a lot of modalities. Modalities being defined as different ways to try to treat this stuff. I recently saw a documentary. I forget the name, but there were four gentlemen our age, and they had been molested by priests in some parish somewhere when they were little kids, right?
I think you're talking about procession.
It might be, and
It's the one where they reenact.
yeah, that one. And
Yeah,
I personally thought that was silly.
it was the most awful thing. I couldn't watch 15 minutes of it to make a child
All
abuse
right.
survivor mimic their own abusers.
I
And
know they had the survivor play the part of the priest, and well, that's a modality. In some circles in psychology, the idea of using drama or acting to help overcome this and heal. Well, there are a group of psychologists who believe that's the right way to do it. I'm like you. I thought that was just the most awful, stupid thing.
yeah,
And and I could tell. Now, I never met any of these gentlemen, but just watching the documentary, they interviewed them quite a bit. I got no sense that they had healed after that.
mm.
I may
Yeah,
be
I know
wrong.
two of them.
Do
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
Okay, I
they're
don't know
still
them,
going through. They're
and
still
so
going through the journey.
I don't know, but I just got the feeling in the documentary that because they interviewed them after the fact, and I got the feeling that it didn't do a damn good a bit of good to them. Now, I don't know if that's true.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm not in their brain, but
Yeah. So my point is there are a lot of different modalities from supposed smart people. You mentioned the eye movement thing, right?
Mhm.
That's one. That's interesting because I think that has some validity, because the idea is if you go back into that abuse, go back to that childhood and relive that, and you're not somehow grounded to where you currently are, that could be a little bit dangerous. And so the eye movement thing, um, is an idea of helping you stay grounded and in the present. You know, I'm literally sitting on my couch, my feet are touching the floor, and my mind is way back into this awfulness. And
Yeah.
that's a way of grounding. Another way of grounding would be to movement. And I think the EMDR thing was discovered by a psychologist noticing that when they worked with a patient while they were walking down a hallway, it helped because the movement, the hallway things moving,
Mhm.
in many of my situations, it helped to go for a ride. Just get in the car and have my wife drive me, and just because of the movement, it kept
Yeah.
me grounded in the present while my mind was in that awfulness.
Yeah, even people that don't experience trauma do it. I mean, like the typically like a corporate work, or like say I'm a computer scientist, so at work I got this issue that it's just blowing my mind. I go take a walk, get up
Yeah,
out the chair, go take a walk, and then boom, it hits me. Go back into the
yeah,
office.
yeah. So there are a lot of modalities out there, and when I was when the memory started coming back, is when it all started to click, and that's where I went deep into studying all these modalities because
Hmm.
now I'm in the thick of it, and it's hitting
Hmm.
me right at home. Now, some people, when the memories come back, they're triggered. Now, an event triggers them, and it brings up this memory. In my
Hmm.
case, I wasn't triggered at all. They just, or who the hell knows why, at this stage of my life, decided to come tumbling back. I have no idea why. Couldn't predict. I couldn't control it or anything. They just started flooding back one day after another.
Yeah.
And in that about 9 month period of 2022, the damage that the hormones, because each time the hormonal rush of cortisol and adrenaline in my body, the damage it did to my body was unbelievable. I went from a fairly healthy guy, I could run 5 miles, do push-ups, whatever,
Hmm.
to the end of that 9 months, I could barely walk from across the room. I lost a ton of weight.
Yeah.
It it it, it has a major damaging physical effect on you.
Yeah, well, cortisol, like you mentioned, as us survivors and victims, we live in our amygdala, which isn't
Yeah,
normal at all.
yeah,
And that's what causes the cortisol to get produced, and it's constantly dripping in our system. And the thing about cortisol is it's very useful for survival, but it needs to be in and out of your system as you need it, not
yeah,
constantly in it. And so victims and survivors actually have physiological, medical, physical issues as
yeah,
well as the emotional stuff going on.
yeah. If they don't release it properly and it's still there, you're right. It'll drip. It'll keep going. Awful stuff. Now you add that hormonal hit to your body to any addiction,
Mhm.
and you complicate the hell out of this, and it, it makes it in many cases, I believe, impossible to heal.
Yeah.
So it's rough. It's really rough, and I'm I have no idea why um, I didn't get addicted to things, but I'm super blessed that I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I have two brothers who are hardcore core alcoholics. One's dead from alcohol, and so it's around me. I don't know why I never turned to it, but just. But there's another side of this healing too, and I would say it's this idea that there's this idea that in life you have a challenge, and you can either face it or you can withdraw from it, right?
Mhm.
And these challenges I would describe as being really hard. And another way I would describe them would be if you take the classic story of that's told through a lot of tales and movies through time. It's the classic story of a knight going outside the castle walls to rescue the princess who has been kidnapped by the dragon. That's a classic story, right?
Sure.
Some version of that. What's interesting about that is when the knight leaves the castle walls, he leaves the safety. He leaves safety, and he's out there. He's vulnerable, and now danger can hit the knight left and right, and he's got to go on a journey, and he's got to go. He's got to head straight into something that's hard. He's got to contend with this dragon, and the dragon wants to kill him, and the dragon's bigger than him, and he has to rescue this princess and bring the princess back. The chance of him succeeding is really slim.
Right.
It just is. And many knights before him have went and not, and the dragon has a whole bunch of bones of dead knights that he's killed. And if he succeeds, gets the princess and comes back through the danger and back to the castle inside his safety, he's went on a heroic journey. If he doesn't succeed, or he quits and comes back early because he's scared or whatnot, he doesn't get that hero's welcome, if you will. And with many abusers, I would suggest that we are on and can be on a heroic journey. And if we choose to go into that journey, so there's scientific evidence that suggests that the hormones in your body, if you choose willingly to go, are friendly. They're good for you hormones. If you go kicking and screaming, don't want to go, but you're pushed and forced, the hormones are the opposite. They're the adrenaline, they're the cortisol, they're the damaging ones.
Like when I get invited to a baby shower.
Yeah, that's when the cortisol goes through the roof. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, for some of us in the male species, that's not fun.
Well, you've
Um,
come a long way in a year, and you start like me. You started your own organization. Tell us about your organization.
yeah, well, I'm really passionate about this idea of protecting children.
Mhm.
And so that's in a nutshell, that's what it's about. It's called Rescue 11 or rescue11.org. And we just got this started, but our mission is to go into communities and start at the high school level. So we go into a high school and start a club. You know, a lot of high schools have clubs, and this club is 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 to raise the idea is to raise awareness that there are predators in your community and they are preying on your children. It's that simple. And so this club will be a hub to the community, and these kids who are protecting their own generation with our help,
Mhm.
they will reach out to other nonprofits, religious groups, civic groups, law law enforcement groups, legal communities, and connect with all these these groups within a community, and raise awareness. And so if a kid on campus is struggling and needs some help, they're not going to go to their own age group for therapy, but this group will already be connected with therapists in the community, etc.
Mhm.
The big idea is to raise awareness that these creeps, these awful child abusers, are right in your community. Often they're coaches. In my town of Salt Lake City, in the last year, an exit an assistant attorney general was busted for child abuse. Mayor of one of the cities just outside of Salt Lake was busted. Coach at a high school was busted for child abuse. A sex therapist,
Yeah.
12 counts of rape. Just a couple weeks ago, I saw on the news a guy who has a gymnasium for gymnasts. You know, young kids want to learn gymnastics, and he runs the gym. He had secret cameras in the bathrooms. He got found out and busted.
Mhm.
And the point is that these predators, they are the worst of the worst of the worst of humanity.
They are.
And they wake up every day and they plot and they plan on how they can steal and abuse your children. Now, that's one hell of a message to a community. And what's an interesting discussion, if you want to go there, is like, well, at what degree of evil or awfulness can a human being go to? Well, you start telling people in a community what they do to their kids,
Mhm.
and many in the community don't want to believe you. There's a classic photograph of when the prisoners were in Nazi Germany, when the Americans came in and went into the concentration camps and rescued some of these prisoners in those camps. You know, they were barely skeletons and whatnot. There's often they would have the people in the town. They would have them come into the concentration camp and clean up the mess and make them aware that, hey, this, in your town this was happening. And there's a classic picture of many of these citizens in the town walking by, seeing all these starving prisoners and putting their hands up because they didn't want to look at it, turning a blind eye to it.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's happening in our communities. I mean,
So it looks like we lost Jimmy. He's frozen up. There he is. He froze up for a second.
oh yeah, the it's a business for these child predators
Mm.
often. and they have to replenish their goods and services. And so they could steal or kidnap a little kid into their realm, like a classic situation would be to kidnap a young girl, and she could literally be raped and raped and raped thousands of times for years of her life. And each time she's raped, they make money.
Mhm.
And then once she's useless, they will often kill her and harvest her organs and make more money. Well, you tell a community this, and it gets worse than that, by the way.
Mhm.
And they're horrified. And they're like, no, this doesn't happen in our community. I'm like, yes, it
Yeah,
does.
does. Yeah.
And it happens all the time. Well, how do they get away with it? Well, they're that good, number one. They're powerful. They're smart. They often are connected in law enforcement.
Hmm.
Often you'll find that in the local police force is also a pedophile and a predator. And so
Yeah.
they get them up. Yeah. Or in the legislature. This one guy I was telling you about here, sex therapist who was busted on 12 counts of rape. He got off. He got a slap on the wrist. And this was years and years ago, and he just recently, last year, got busted again. So hope, like you guys try to do, you try to change laws to make it tougher for these creeps. Hopefully, it'll stick this time. But yeah, so our goal is to raise awareness within the community around what they do, how these perpetrators get to your kids online.
Hmm.
You don't want to be giving little 10-year-old Susie a phone with full access to the internet.
Yeah.
How they prey on these kids, like if you imagine a lion watching a whole bunch of wildebeest run by, that lion is looking for the weak one, the young one, the old, the frail. They know who they're looking for. These predators will go to malls, to just the mall, and they'll just sit there and they'll watch kids, and they may see three 14-year-old girls walk by, and they can spot them. They can tell if that young girl's maybe homeless or troubled, and they'll go up to them, or they'll have a kid. They'll have a kid their own age who's on their side. They'll pay that
Mhm.
kid a bunch of money, and that kid will go befriend that young girl and just entrap them and entice them with money or come to this party and this. And they are really good, and they're doing this, and they do it online.
Yeah.
And well, so that's what we're about, is making communities aware that this is happening.
That's great. Yeah, awareness is one of our biggest initiatives. Like you said, yeah, the stigma of being a survivor is it used to be really bad. It's getting better. Um, but yeah, people don't believe you most of the time. Uh and going back to law enforcement, one of my abusers, one of my main abuser, uh, was the policeman who investigated the Boy Scouts. He was the commander of the pedophile unit in the New Orleans Police Department. So if you're a pedophile, what a great job to have. You
Yeah,
know?
isn't it?
The the evidence in child abuse cases in New Orleans, anyway, it isn't kept in a regular evidence room. It's kept in a separate evidence room that the only the people in the pedophile unit can go to, and he had the keys to it, and so he had all the kiddie porn you wanted.
Oh, that's so awful. Yeah,
Mhm.
people don't realize that these pedophiles, they also gravitate to jobs and positions like the Boy Scouts.
Of authority.
You could have the greatest heart in the world, and you say, I want to start an orphanage because I want to help these young kids who need it, which is amazing. You start this organization, and eventually you have to have people come help because you're building this organization. Well, these pedophiles will join organizations like that because it puts them
Mm.
closer to kids. And so you think of any kid organization, whether it be a religious group of kids, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, orphanages, etc., you will find these pedophiles will gravitate, and they will often ruin the organization over time, given them long enough.
Mhm.
Well, the communities don't believe that. They don't know that's happening. They look in their cute little community, and they have little youth groups and this and that, and then just to sit back and think, wow, of all the adults involved in that youth group, are there any that are pedophiles? And the pedophiles themselves, they're trying to soften the blow. They're renaming themselves MAP,
I know.
minor attracted persons. Like, that's such bullshit.
Right.
You guys are the worst creepy people out there, and they're trying to gain acceptance and this and that. You know, you can believe what you want morally and do this or that, but when you get into the realm of messing with our children,
Hmm.
that to me, that's the hard line.
Yeah.
You know,
My
64 babies
unattracted
were
person
too
is
late.
just so offensive. You know,
Oh, it sounds soft and oh, we like kids and whatnot. It's like, no, you want to ruin kids' lives.
want to rape them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
So
were talking about the severity of what's the worst crime in the world. I really do think raping children, pedophilia, pederast, or whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
I think it's the worst because it basically kills a kid. I didn't have a childhood at all,
yeah,
and it's affected me so much throughout my adult life, and
yeah,
probably will to my very end days. And
yeah,
what's the recompense? What's restitution for that? How do you heal? And it's a very, very, very complicated subject for the survivor.
yeah,
Problems with relationships, trust is a very rare,
yeah,
exclusive commodity in our world. We don't give it out very easily.
yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, it is. They are the worst of the worst, and they don't they don't just go hurt kids. They do hurt kids, but it's hard to put yourself into the mind of somebody who's that evil. For
Mhm.
instance, how could how could an adult like that steal a child, uh, torture and abuse that child, and while they're in the act of torturing and abusing that child, they are becoming sexually aroused? That's just some messed up stuff. And they often want to scare that child so much that his little body gets filled with adrenaline in his blood. And they want to either drain the blood or kill the child and collect that blood and drink it because that's an adrenochrome thing and they get a certain freaky high off of it. There's another there's another bit of thinking in that realm that if they drink that young blood, it'll help them live longer lives. The whole longevity bit. There's that, and so they the they are so clever. There's a compound in Poland, and and they participate in this, for instance. And if they go kidnap little Susie, the police force in the town will know, hey, Susie's been kidnapped, right? And so there will be a bulletin out to find kidnapped little Susie. Well, they'll take little Susie and they'll fly little Susie to an Arab country where, in some places of the world, it's legal for an adult to marry a little kid. So little Susie, wherever that is, will get legally married to that adult, who will then change little Susie's name to Betty or whatever the hell. And then they'll have that kid come back to the compound, and now that's no longer little Susie, it's Betty. The police are looking for Betty, and Betty will have papers and everything. So now they've captured that kid,
Yeah.
and they have their rich clientele. They'll fly into their little compound, and the worst of the worst, they'll just like an adult will pay for a prostitute. Here, go in this room and do what you do, and pay me money. And these adults will come in, and there will be a little child, often a little boy, and that adult can do anything that adult wants to that little child, and they won't be satisfied unless that little child is killed and pulled limb to limb, and they're sexually aroused while doing it.
Mhm.
And after that adult pays a lot of money to do that,
Mhm.
they have a medical staff in their compound who will come in and collect that little child and harvest the organs and sell them. Tell me, tell me, tell me of anybody who goes. There's no such thing as worse than that. Those are the worst of the worst people in this world,
Absolutely.
and they're worse than a Hitler.
Yeah.
Hitler is pretty damn bad,
Yeah, it's
and this is a business. In this business, they have to go collect more children to satisfy this clientele. They'll go find young women who are pregnant, and they'll make a deal with them, pay them lots of money, and they say when you're going to have that baby, come to our compound because we want that baby.
yeah.
And So they have to constantly replenish their supply of young human life.
Hmm.
It's the most awful thing, and it's spreading, and it's becoming. They're trying to make it more mainstream. They're trying to make it like the pedophiles. Oh, what we do is not that bad. We
Yeah.
just we're just attracted to young kids. It's like, oh wow.
Yeah,
You want
it's love. It's remember the NAMBLA days, North American
yeah,
Boy Love Association. They would argue that, I have a genuine love for this child.
yeah, that's bullshit. That
My
is so
libido.
yeah, their motto is sex before eight, before it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they hide under these banners. Some of the ritualistic groups, they hide under the banner that, yeah, we sacrifice children because we're giving the most precious thing to the gods. And I'm like, oh, you guys are so full of it. You're just twisted, sick perverts. That's all you are. You
Mm.
can pretend to be sacrificing to the gods and all this kind of stuff. You're just there to get your sickness on at the expense of our children.
Yeah, day before yesterday, I got a call out the blue from Jeffrey Epstein victim who hasn't gone public yet. And
Sure.
the story she tells is just horrific. And it is like you say, like in my case, the first one's with the Boy Scouts group, which was a front for a international pedophile ring.
Yeah.
And so yes, these people are smart, they're sophisticated, they are connected, they're organized, they
Yeah.
network, and it is huge.
Yeah. They're a powerful group
You
to
know.
contend with.
But if you approach the old lady in the church, she's about 80 years old. She thinks that professional wrestling is real and the space mission is fake. And so she doesn't believe us when we tell her that, hey, the priest has molested me. And
Right?
yeah. And in my case, all of my authority figures were raping me. So you had a scoutmaster, you had a policeman, you had a priest. Oh, uh, my own mom, she suspected a single mom, and again, they scoped us out. They canvassed the neighborhood for single mothers that were struggling.
Of course they do. We'll
Yeah,
be the father figure to your boy. Let us do
that's
it.
exactly what happened. And at some point, she got suspicious that something was happening, and she confronted them. And in return for continued access to me, they paid her rent and her electricity bill.
Uh,
Yeah, so my
yeah,
own mom was in on it. So yeah, it's evil. It's pure evil.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's amazing you started this organization and doing what you can to get this word out.
yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The kind
I'm
words.
I'm very happy to have met you and hope we can align, in the future on more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
Wow.
speaking of that, we're getting up to time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to cover first off? All the links and art and everything that we talked about today is going to be in the description of this video. So
Okay.
don't
No, I
worry about
appreciate it.
that.
Yeah.
Um, anything that you'd like to say? Any closing final thoughts?
Well, I guess my final thought would be something to the idea that if you are inclined out there to help us protect these little children, your neighbor's children, and you can be made aware that there are people in your communities who are actively targeting your children to steal them, to take them, to abuse them, to kill them. If you would be inclined to help us, please get in touch with us, and we can put you to work. And this is
Mhm.
a real fight, and it's more and more of a fight because these evil people, they're trying to become mainstream.
Yeah.
They want to be accepted, and this is a battle for our children. That's the way I look at it. And if you want to be involved in this battle and you don't know where to turn, contact myself or Richard. You know, that's the plea I would make.
Absolutely. I don't know what your schedule is, but I take calls 24 hours a day. So,
Yeah,
if you're in crisis, you need help, you need somebody to talk to, you think nobody will understand you, call us.
yeah, absolutely.
When you're feeling it, doesn't matter what time it is.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
All right, Jimmy, it's been a pleasure for having you on the show. Your
yeah. Thank
artwork
you
is
very much.
incredibly beautiful.
Thank you.
I can't wait to
This
hear
was
your music one day. Are you online anyplace?
Yeah, you can go on Spotify and just type in Jimmy Toro. I've got some music there.
Oh, cool.
How about yourself? I see a bunch
Uh,
of guitars and some.
Yeah, I'm a bass player.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. I started playing guitar when I was 5, and I graduated to bass when I was 12. And
Yeah.
in college, I worked my way through school being a session bassist.
Oh,
And
really? Yeah. In a
yeah,
recording studio.
yeah, I went to music school. I went to a place called New Orleans Center of Creative Arts. They call it the Juilliard of the South.
Yeah. Well, to be a good session player, you got to really know your stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. How about yourself? Do you have music you played on or can go listen to? Or
Yeah, I'm on Spotify as well.
okay, I'll look
Yeah,
you up.
it's under the band called the Swamp Boys.
The Swamp Boys. Okay.
Yeah, Swamp Boys, one word. It's not really a band. It's just me. I do all the instruments and recording and everything. It's
All
my
right,
like my imaginary friend.
right. No, I
Because
do the
me,
same. I have a Pro Tools setup here, and yeah,
uh,
I do it all here. It's really fantastic.
yeah, great.
Yeah.
All right, Jimmy, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and again, thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to do this for us.
Oh,
And
anytime.
and
Anytime I can help, you let me know.
absolutely, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, and that's the end of the show. Thanks for listening. And I know it's a lot for people's attention spans these days. They like 5-minute YouTube videos, but thanks for checking us out over the entire hour. And hopefully something resonated with you. And if you need help, like Jimmy said, reach out, reach out. This is our awareness initiatives, and that's where we start to tackle this problem. Thank you, Jimmy.
Yep.
Take care.
Okay.